You've heard Donald Trump sound the alarm that the United States is facing an invasion by dangerous gang members and that violent protesters are destroying U.S. cities.
Portland, Oregon. I mean, every time I look at that place, the place is burning down. There's fires all over the place.
Of course, the vast majority of protesters have not been violent, but he's not the first leader to manufacture a crisis, to seize extraordinary powers. This is how former Philippine dictator Rodrigo Duterte justified his war on drugs in 2016.
You destroy my country, I'll kill you. And it's a legitimate thing. If you destroy our young children, I will kill you.
But is the United States really facing a national emergency? Or is this just a tactic on Trump's part? I'm Justin Bergman, International Affairs Editor here at The Conversation in Australia, and this is The Making of an Autocrat, Episode 3, Manufacture a Crisis. I'm joined by Natasha Lindstad, Professor of Government at the University of Essex in England. Natasha, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've studied the gradual decay of democracies around the globe and the rise of authoritarians. So how does this idea of a crisis fit in? What makes for a good crisis in an autocrat's mind?
So an autocrat loves a crisis. A crisis is the way that they mobilize their base, the way that they can depict themselves as the savior, as this messianic type of figure that is going to save people from this chaotic world or whatever chaos or crisis that they perceive to exist. Sometimes these crises actually do exist. Sometimes there is some chaos, and often it's sort of more economic chaos or some kind of economic crisis that people feel quite a bit of discontent. But other times, the social and economic discontent, they find ways to multiply it. They really rev people up.
And crises can come in many different forms, right?
So often it is the economic issues or some sort of social economic issues that can be tapped into. There's already some kind of frustration there. But what an aspiring autocrat tends to do is focus on some kind of scapegoat.
Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say
there's some group that is to blame for what is happening, and maybe they pose a security threat or they pose an economic threat. But one of the common strategies is to say that there is some kind of a terrorist or insurgency group that is threatening the nation, and therefore you need some kind of strong leadership that can step in and, use an iron fist to deal with it. And other times, there is a context. There is an economic and social crisis going on, and they just try to make it worse. And they tap into people's stresses and so forth. You think about the case of, Donald Trump more recently in the 2015 campaign. There was still a lot of, in the U.S., a lot of angst about the post-2008 financial crisis and the way it was handled. And people were frustrated, and he tapped into those frustrations, and he said, listen, this is the problem. We have too many immigrants. And he did it again in the campaign for the 2024 election, and he won. I mean, it happens all the time, and we can see this happened in El Salvador under Nayib Bukele, who calls himself the world's coolest dictator.
First, we send the army to the streets. That's probably not very popular internationally, but it was needed in our country.
And in the case of El Salvador, there was real problems with really high crime rates. And he came in and he reduced crime rates. But of course, that came at the expense of human rights. You also had the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey against Erdogan, which some thought that it might have been manufactured because he seemed to use it to purge thousands of people and go after whatever elements of the military that he thought were dangerous to him. So I think you see it's quite common when there's a situation of already some polarization that they foment it, they make it worse, and then they strike. They use this situation to go after what they perceive to be potential enemies.
And what's the payoff with these crises, these emergencies? What do they allow an autocrat to do?
Well, it allows the autocrat to come in as the hero, and so they often want to portray life as quite chaotic. And this storyline that they create has enemies, has scapegoats, and then they provide a heroic, a role for themselves. And a lot of it is peddling in conspiracy theories and spewing a lot of lies and things that aren't really true. But they're able to connect with their followers in a very intense way, where their followers really blindly believe whatever they say and need this sort of paternalistic type of figure that's going to come in and just solve everything for them. So Hitler was able to take advantage of the fact that the country had been dealing with the aftermath of World War I, the reparations, the Great Depression, and he was incredibly charismatic. He tapped into a lot of the discontent that was already there and was able to find, a scapegoat, an enemy. You had Jews deliberately targeted during that period and all kinds of violence against Jews. Jewish businesses were targeted, Jewish books were burned, and he was able to really galvanize his supporters who were still reeling from the fallout of World War I. And they felt they needed a man of iron will that could shake things up.
And it seems like they get some support from the population as well, like a rally around the flag effect, right?
That's right. They are able to tap into nationalist sentiments, and then it makes it almost impossible to disagree with the autocrat or aspiring autocrat, because anyone that does is labeled a traitor.
We'll be right back. Natasha, let's focus on Trump now. Specifically, how is he manufacturing or taking advantage of a crisis in America right now?
So when Trump took over, the area that he was the most popular on was immigration. And he just claimed we have an immigration problem that is out of control and that he was going to deport 11 million immigrants. And this was the issue that he was by far the most popular on because he came in and said that immigrants are doing all kinds of terrible things.
Now a murderer, I believe this, it's in their genes. And we got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
This was not based in any kind of fact because 90% of the time that immigrants are imprisoned, it's for violations that just have to do with like immigration-related laws. U.S. citizens are 5 times more likely to commit violent offenses. So none of this was really grounded in any kind of reality. But he was able to tap into fears that the U.S. demographics were changing, that it was no longer going to be white Americans that would be the majority. And he was getting support not just from white Americans, but from Hispanic Americans as well that were worried about what increasing immigration would do to their own pocketbook. How would it affect their own jobs? And so he, along with Fox News, would almost daily focus on this immigration crisis, and there would be all kinds of imagery of caravans that were coming up from parts of Latin America that were coming into the U.S., and he was characterizing this almost as an invasion, like it was a war, that these people were coming bringing diseases and were very, very dangerous. And that tapped into people's fears of other people. But interestingly enough, views on immigration have really changed in the U.S. since he's overstepped by having these ICE raids where men are covered in like face masks and they're in plain clothes and they're just coming up to people and seizing them into unmarked vans. I mean, that's been really, really scary, I think, for many Americans. So we see that the perception of the threat from immigrants has decreased, ironically. And now, in the name of national security, he has been really violating not only just sort of human rights, but also U.S. norms and laws on what the executive, what the president is allowed to do. If we were to take the case of Venezuela, and so he started to see Venezuelans as a huge enemy.
Why? Because we consider Venezuela to be not a very friendly country. They send millions of people really and probably...
Talking a lot about this this cartel or organized criminal group, Tren de Araguas, which is from Venezuela, but mostly operates in human smuggling and isn't really that involved in the drug trade. In fact, Venezuelans aren't that involved in the drug trade. But he has said that this is a huge threat to U.S. national security, and you have boats being targeted really unlawfully, where Congress should be involved in this, and he's circumvented this, and he's targeting Venezuelan supposedly drug dealers without really a full understanding of where the drugs are coming from and who is most likely to be involved in drug trafficking.
And really at the heart of all of this is him trying to amass more power for himself, right?
Exactly. And so he has really autocratized the U.S. at a speed which I don't know if we could have even predicted, though the blueprint was there with Project 2025. So he's really done a lot to amass more power into his own hands, mostly by just making the legislature just completely irrelevant because he goes around it all the time. He's shattered norms and engaged in constitutional hardball where he just refuses to do things that most presidents in the past would have done and engages in executive orders, whether it be bringing out the military or members of the military to not target external enemies, but supposed internal threats, putting National Guard members in cities to tackle U.S. citizens. It's completely astounding how much power he has been able to gain in his own hands in such a short time. We're less than a year into this administration. So definitely from his base, they do not question. If anything that is a national security need, everybody needs to support him, because if you don't support him, then you're a traitor. I mean, I know that a lot of the tension and the blow up that he had with Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman from Georgia that recently stepped down, was about the Epstein files, but she was also really critical of the fact that the U.S. was getting involved in more wars and was being more aggressive on the global stage, all in the names of national security, which she didn't see eye to eye with him on that. And that's where some of the MAGA movement is starting to slip from him, because that's not what he had originally promised. I mean, they were in favor of the border wall, and he hasn't really talked about the border wall. Instead, he seems to be involved in all kinds of different countries all around the world, whether it be, giving the impression that he was going to invade Panama or Greenland, and of course all these incursions that are going on in the Caribbean. And so he's doing all kinds of things that don't really make much sense. It plays with a lot of the base because this is all for national security. But anyone who just starts engaging in some kind of critical thinking starts to think this is not really what is going to make us more secure.
What do you think the long-term goal is here with all these crises?
Well, it's his way of getting people to not focus on what his latest scandal is. I mean, he had been dogged by the Epstein files for months and months and months, and he only had a respite because there was a shutdown. And so when he starts talking about immigration, I mean, this pretty much fell into his lap. He's going to be able to focus on this, and that there's all these enemies of the U.S., and that it's going to require a stronger hand. It's going to require strong, decisive leadership, and that it's really only he that can solve these types of problems for Americans.
Natasha Lindstad, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more from Natasha Lindstad at The Conversation. This episode was produced by Isabella Podwinski, sound designed by Michelle Macklem. Our head of audio is Gemma Ware, and our head of editorial innovation is Ashlyn McGee. Misha Ketchel is the editor of The Conversation Australia, and Stephen Kahn is the editor-in-chief of The Conversation UK. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organization. You can sign up to our free daily newsletter by clicking the link in our show notes. You can also listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.